Well, hi everybody, and welcome back to the Ultimate Fashion History's FAVE Film Fashion. I'm really excited about this one because I'll be talking about one of my genuine all-time favorite movies. Things are going to get hot as we head back to 1974 for Irwin Allen's The Towering Inferno. I'm not even going to say Towering Inferno, or TI as fans call it, is a guilty pleasure, because I'm not guilty. I'm pleading innocent on loving this movie because it's such a great adventure and so glamorous, and what a star-studded cast. Paul Newman, Steve McQueen, Richard Chamberlain stepping bravely out of character and playing the baddie. The fire is all his fault. Something to do with buying cheap wiring. Who knows? Who else is in Towering Inferno? William Holden. Fred Astaire in a cameo as a charismatic conman. Robert Wagner. No spoilers here. I think we've all seen it. He meets a fiery end. Jennifer Jones. O.J. Simpson. Suave Robert Vaughn, and offering eye candy because she doesn't do much else in Towering Inferno, the impeccably exquisite Faye Dunaway. And it's really Faye Dunaway we're going to be looking at in this video. It was produced by Irwin Allen, as you probably already know, and costumes were by this guy, who you may not know. His name, which is not easy to pronounce, I'll try to do it correctly, is Paul Zastupnevich. Maybe not a name as famous as Edith Head. Paul, we'll just use his first name because his last name is so difficult, had a very long relationship with Irwin Allen. He did the costumes for The Lost World, he did the costumes for Lost in Space, and in 1972 he did the costume for Allen's other big disaster movie, The Poseidon Adventure. Now, of course, disaster movies were very, very popular in the early 1970s. They sort of reflected, didn't they, the kind of fear of the world running to muck. Think about it. This was sort of the Watergate era. But these costumes, they're sort of sci-fi-ish or just plain wardrobe. Nobody had great costumes in the Poseidon Adventure, but they were great. It was good wardrobe. Things like Lost in Space, this was your 1960s sci-fi wardrobe. So you don't really think of Paul Zastupnevich as being somebody who would design one of the most beautiful evening dresses ever seen on screen. But indeed he did. I always think that maybe when he got his job spec and the cast list for Towering Inferno, he must have just rubbed his hands together, because what costume designer doesn't want the opportunity to create an exquisite evening gown for Faye Dunaway? I was 9 years old when I was taken to see The Towering Inferno, and that was the big movie of the year. So it was a huge family event and we all went to see it. And this movie had a very deep and very long-lasting effect on me. I didn't like it when the fire started and burnt down that lovely building. I liked the scenes before, the party scenes, but everybody was drinking cocktails and there were beautiful women wearing lovely evening clothes. This really impacted me, and I became quite fascinated by cocktail culture. And many years later, I would actually go on to write a book about it. Classic Cocktails, Time-Honored Recipes for the Home Bartender by Amanda Halley, illustrated by David Wolfe. Skyhorse Press, you can buy it on Amazon. Look, I'm doing a plug for myself. But I think my fascination with cocktail culture really did start with The Towering Inferno. I loved the evening dresses in it, especially the one that Faye Dunaway wears, that really went down to become one of the most famous evening gowns in cinematic history. And the only way to really get a feel for just how beautiful and elegant this is if I show you a tiny little clip.
I'd like to talk to Susan for a minute. Right. Find me the architect who designed you, and who needs Doug Roberts.
I do.
Oh my goodness, what a fabulous dress. Here is the original costume sketch for the dress. And here it is, at least one of the versions. I am guessing that at least 4 or 5 copies of this dress were made, as Faye Dunaway wears it for more than half of the movie. This is obviously a version from when the fire had already started, because you'll see that it's intentionally distressed to indicate her various hardships. I am willing to bet my next paycheck that Paul was inspired by Versailles 73 when he sat down to design this dress. What was Versailles 73? I'm sure a lot of you already know, but just in case you don't, it was a very famous fashion show that took place at the Palace of Versailles, just outside of Paris, in 1973. That was sort of a competition between American designers and French designers. Now, America had always had terrific fashion designers. Think about people like Adrian. We've talked about him often enough, haven't we? Claire McCardle. But Paris was still, you know, the reigning champion when it came to fashion. Versailles 73 changed all that. It was set up as a competition, in a way, between French designers and American designers. On the French side, we had people like Yves Saint Laurent, Pierre Cardin, Ungaro, Dior, Givenchy. America offered up Oscar de la Renta, Stephen Barrows, Halston, and Anne Klein. The French stuff looked beautiful, but very haute couture. The American stuff, however, really spoke to this new generation with soft chiffons. It was easy, it moved, it was so contemporary, so simple. And the consensus say that America won. And if you look at Faye Dunaway's dress, and then you look at the American offerings from Versailles 73, it's a pretty sure bet that Paul, very wisely, decided to let the new wave of American design influence his look for Faye Dunaway. There is a terrific movie by Deborah Riley Draper called Versailles 73, American Runway Revolution. It's a great film for fashion buffs, and it really sort of speaks to that moment when American fashion would take over. And when you think about the big names in the 70s, okay, there's Yves Saint Laurent, he kind of ruled the 70s. But then, oh my goodness, Oscar de la Renta, Halston, and then Calvin Klein with this easy-going, effortless American style. It all started here, Versailles 73. Let's talk about Paul's clever use of palette in his designs for the female cast of Towering Inferno. What color is fire? Well, fire is red and orange, and smoke is black and grey. And so he cleverly put the supporting female cast in tones that would stand out against this fiery background. White, pink. This is Sheila Allen, who plays, I think, the mayor's wife in hot pink. She was actually Irwin Allen's fiancée at the time of Towering Inferno. White, pale pink. These colors worked really well against the contrasting palette of fire. But then he took it to another degree with Faye Dunaway's dress, which is in a completely different register to both fire and to the other supporting cast members. This beautiful nude, sort of verging on taupe, a completely different palette register to both fire and the other gowns. Really, really clever. So in every scene, your eye automatically goes to Faye Dunaway. It's pulled in by this contrasting palette. But the real talking point of Faye Dunaway's gown was, of course, that plunging neckline. It almost went down to her navel. But of course, fashion is not an island, it is a response. You've probably heard me say that a few times, haven't you, if you've been watching some of my videos. And Faye Dunaway's plunging neckline and diaphanous gown absolutely speak to one of the obsessions of the era. In fact, it speaks to two obsessions of the era. The first is sex. Sex itself. The 70s was the time of the sexual revolution. Think about it. Books like The Joy of Sex. Didn't everybody have a copy of this hidden away? I know that my parents certainly did. 74 was the year that Emmanuel came out. This sort of soft porn movie that was considered artistic, and so people who didn't normally go and see porn would feel okay about going to see Emmanuel or Deep Throat. It was the era when there was a lot of discussion about the female orgasm. So sex itself as an act, as a thing to do, as a conversation piece, was a big thing in the 1970s, and this was reflected in fashion. Now, of course, there had always been sexy dresses, hadn't there? I mean, think about the 1930s and those beautiful, slinky, backless dresses. But it was really in the 70s when the idea came about that the more flesh you showed and the deeper your neckline, the sexier it was. It's when this idea of flesh equating to sex appeal really took hold, which is why hot pants were a 70s trend and midriffs. But of course, Faye Dunaway is not wearing a bra, is she? So this speaks, of course, to the women's liberation movement and the burn the bra moment. We already know in Towering Inferno that Faye Dunaway's character is a liberated woman. She and her boyfriend Paul Newman have quite a grown-up and very 70s conversation about their relationship. He wants to buy a farm in Montana, and she has this wonderful piece of dialogue, which is so 70s, where she says, I want to live on a farm. I want a place where our children can grow up and roam free, but they just offered me managing editor. So she really speaks to this sort of 1970s liberated woman kind of dealing with the opposing things that society expects of her. But this idea of burning your bra and going braless absolutely influenced fashion. Take a look at this Smirnoff ad. Now that really is a plunging neckline. And of course, lingerie had to respond to this. In the 1970s, there were all kinds of weird contraptions that were sort of strapless bras without a front and all of this kind of stuff. But my favorite is the nipple bra. Now, this is for the woman who daren't not wear a bra, but kind of wanted to buy into this idea of going braless. Of course, people had gone braless for years. Betty Davis never wore a bra, much to the chagrin of anyone who tried to put a costume on her. But look at this, the nipple bra. Now you can have that sensual no bra look while wearing a bra. So all of these things, the sexual revolution, the burning of the bras, it's all here in Faye Dunaway's wonderful, sexy, diaphanous dress. Well, socio-political and cultural connections notwithstanding, this was one hell of a durable dress. This is the kind of dress that if you caught it on a doorknob, it would fall off. And evidently, a lot of male viewers were sort of hoping this would happen when they were watching the Towering Inferno the first time around, but it never does. This light and very flimsy dress endures a lot of trauma, including the terrifying scenic elevator moment. Ooh, even watching that GIF makes me nervous. I'm not the only one to sort of notice that this dress is incredibly durable. In their original review of the Towering Inferno, the New York Times mentioned this. Look at this. Faye Dunaway is the editor of a woman's magazine who goes through the entire fire in a dress so sheer but indestructible that it becomes an engineering feat in itself. Her hair and makeup was pretty indestructible in Towering Inferno too. First of all, I love her makeup. Now in 1974, the average woman was still wearing an awful lot of quite heavy and colourful makeup, including false eyelashes and all of that. In Towering Inferno, we really see on film for the first time in a mainstream movie in the 70s, one of the first movies, this real move towards that very natural look that would really dominate the American beauty aesthetic for the rest of the decade. Think of that natural, healthy beauty like Cheryl Tiegs and Lauren Hutton and Farrah Fawcett too. But we see it here with Faye Dunaway, this wonderful neutral palette and these nude lips. Her hair, of course, is the cottage loaf hairdo, which was a big trend in the 1970s. It endured throughout the decade in one form or another, and it was part, of course, of the whole return to nostalgia, the nostalgic trends. This jumped on the Victorian, Edwardian trend. like the actual cottage loaf hairdos at the turn of the century. Everybody had a version of this at one point or another. Barbra Streisand had a version in What's Up, Doc? Linda Ronstadt had a version, and it's still a really pretty hairdo. I might actually do a tutorial on how to get it because it's so easy to do, even with shorter hair. And in Faye Dunaway's case, it certainly endured as well. There she is at the end of the movie. She just has a few attractive tendrils falling down and then this very strategically placed soot. I love it. Well, I'm sure you'll agree with me that this absolutely beautiful nude chiffon gown wouldn't look out of place on the runway today. We could easily see this on today's red carpet. Oh wait, we sort of have, haven't we? Absolutely timeless. It still looks beautiful today. Hope you enjoyed this fiery and flaming foray into FAVE film fashion. I had a great time. I really enjoyed this one. You can contact me through my website, amandahalley.com. Join our Facebook group. I'll be back very soon with more FAVE film fashion from the ultimate fashion history. Just click the little circle to subscribe. And as always, thanks ever so much for watching. Bye for now, and don't play with matches. And don't buy cheap wiring.